Our second speaker is Ron Huebert, and Ron is Professor Emeritus at Dalhousie University. He's published many articles and 3 monographs: John Ford, Baroque English Dramatist, The Performance of Pleasure in English Renaissance Drama, and Privacy in the Age of Shakespeare. He's also co-editor of Early Modern Spectatorship, published by McGill-Queen's in 2019. And note that this volume features the work of many members of the CSRS, a group Ron has faithfully supported for decades, winning its Montaigne Prize in 2004 and its Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016. On a personal note, Ron was my department head, and Halifax, being Halifax, my neighbor, when I taught at Dalhousie in 1993-94. So Ron, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you. I'm going to begin with 3 words of acknowledgement. The first is cultural, and the second and third are personal. As you probably know, my university, Dalhousie, sits on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. Now here's my personal, my individual acknowledgements are to 2 people who have contributed in the past to this association, though they are no longer with us. I continue to value them, partly as editors of these 2 volumes, Bartholomew Fair and Much Ado About Nothing, edited respectively by George Huebert and Sheldon Zittner, who were both very active members of our Renaissance community here in Canada, and who in different ways were, I thought of as academic friends, which indeed they were to me. During our many conversations about spectatorship over several years, and especially while we were jointly creating chapter 6 of the book that Ken mentioned, Early Modern Spectatorship, my colleague and I, David McNeil, would frequently talk about surveillance. And it was undeniable that both of us had internalized Michel Foucault's view of this matter, namely that surveillance is a sinister and dangerous weapon, which early modern authorities often used to elicit fear and compliance in the hearts and minds of their subjects. You could confirm this paradigm in many ways, some of which we demonstrated, for example, in our descriptions of the audience behavior at the execution of Anne Askew. Our chapter 6 was called Dying in Earnest, Public Executions and Their Audiences. And one of the sub-themes here was that people who attended an execution had to be aware that they were not only witnessing an event, but might be witnessing an event. And so their behavior could become important. But I now think there are times when we need to step back from the powerful influence of Foucault's persuasive rhetoric. There are texts and performances within early modern culture that ask us to surmise that however dangerous the networks of surveillance may have been, they were also at times risible. We should remember that we are trying to imagine the workings of a culture with no established police force and without even the reassurance that arises from a regular and regulated postal service. In our own day, it has perhaps become too easy to imagine both of these trusted institutions failing us in pretty spectacular ways. And we may therefore be ready to look for a moment at surveillance in its most laughable forms. I should say here that my arguments were written down before the pandemic and before the Black Lives Matter movement. So if I were drafting this today, I probably couldn't write the sentences just the same way I did when I initially put them down. But I did think of that as a pretext for revising the whole thing. And then I thought, no, it's also a pretext for leaving things just the way they were, because otherwise I might not be able to establish my overall point, namely that spectatorship, surveillance can sometimes be a matter of laughter too. Well, Much Ado About Nothing is a good place to start, I think. Almost every scene in this play engages in or reports on one form of surveillance or another. And some of it is brilliantly funny. Some of it dangerously sinister, to be sure. I've written at some length about these layers of noting and misnoting on another occasion, but I won't repeat myself here. Instead, I'm going to foreground the characters who are given the official responsibility for watching. One of these Ken has already named, Constable Dogberry. In Shakespeare's Messina, as in Elizabethan London, the law could be enforced, if at all, by an unpaid constable, Dogberry, elected for 1 year and charged with the task of recruiting in Headborough verges to serve as the second in command, as well as an undisclosed number of watchmen to guard the city gates at night. Perhaps policing of such amazing informality has its merits in certain communities and for certain kinds of crime. That it had its drawbacks is suggested by the practice of Shakespeare's Vienna. I'm thinking of Measure for Measure here, where a constable elect could pay a fee to exempt himself from service, a convention that has elevated the least competent male citizen, Elbow, to the role of constable for his ward for the last 7.5 years, right? Everybody with any wit buys himself out after being elected. There's no similar claim of election fraud in Messina, but the abilities of the current office holders do raise questions. Constable Dogberry is illiterate, and Headborough Verges is old. Even if you argue that these are deficiencies you can compensate for, it would be difficult to support this claim after observing these two officers at work. Dogberry instructs the men who are to watch outside Leonato's house as follows. This is your charge. You shall comprehend all vagrom men. You are to bid any man stand in the prince's name. But suppose he doesn't comply, says a subordinate. Why, then take no note of him, Dogberry says. But let him go, and presently call the rest of the watch together, and thank God you are rid of a knave. For the kind of surveillance being carried out here, literacy is not required. For your writing and reading, says Dogberry to one of those watchmen, let that appear when there is no need of such vanity. Might mention here that scholars believe that Dogberry was that the first Dogberry was played by Will Kemp, a member of Shakespeare's company who also played Falstaff, and who I think got into trouble with Shakespeare at various times precisely because of his contempt for reading and writing. He, including Shakespeare's own writing, I think it was difficult to get Will Kemp to follow the script, and that was one of Shakespeare's small professional frustrations. We expect, of course, that a system as lazy and incompetent as this one will achieve nothing. And how wrong we are. At the examination of the offenders, a watchman reports correctly that he heard Borachio confess, quote, that he had received 1,000 ducats of Don John for accusing the lady hero wrongfully. The irony is nicely pointed by Borachio himself, who says to Don Pedro and Claudio, what your wisdoms could not discover, these shallow fools have brought to light. There is a kind of poetic injustice at work here. The villains are made to pay much less than they deserve, so as to ensure that the heroes, including Hero herself, have a second chance. If the system of surveillance is lackadaisical and much ado, exactly the opposite is true of Smithfield, the setting of Bartholomew Fair. The spy master here is not a reluctantly elected constable, but a crown appointee, a justice of the peace, Adam Overdo. As his name suggests, Overdo takes his job and himself very seriously. His mission, he believes, is to identify the enormities of the fair, his favorite word, enormities, and to bring the perpetrators to trial at the court of pie powders. That's from Pierre Poudre, Dusty Foot, where he will be the presiding judge. He is an educated man who cites classical precedent, Junius Brutus, in support of his task. His education has equipped him with a skill set he values, so he brings with him a little black book in which he records his observations. He's not satisfied with the slapdash performance of his subordinates. We hear with other men's ears, he complains, on behalf of the public persons like himself. We see with other men's eyes. A foolish constable or a sleepy watchman is all our information. To address the problem, he has come to the fair in disguise as Mad Arthur of Bradley, so as to avoid inhibiting the enormities which he now expects to unfold. I, Adam Overdo, am resolved therefore to spare spy money hereafter, and to make mine own discoveries. If we were still in Shakespeare's Messina, these tactics might work, but Johnson has put Overdo into a world in which he is bound to misread the signs he encounters, some of which have been deliberately planted in his path so as to mislead him. The fun of watching Adam Overdo negotiate the fair is therefore the very Johnsonian pastime of enjoying the defeat and humiliation of someone with pretensions not that much unlike Johnson's own. I will spare Adam Overdo the shame of having his defeats remembered in detail, though I will comment at some length on his final scene. But even the briefest summary would have to note that in his Arthur of Bradley disguise, he is thrashed by his brother-in-law's guardian, Humphrey Wasp. He is accused of picking his brother-in-law's pocket by the actual cutpurse, Edgeworth. He is arrested by watchmen, put in the stocks, and released from custody by accident when a fight breaks out. In short, he is clearly the victim rather than the instigator of surveillance. But Adam Overdo will not accept defeat. Even in his last scene, and the final scene of the play, he believes that his role is unchanged, his authority unchallenged. Now to my enormities, he says. Look upon me, O London, and see me, O Smithfield, the example of justice, the mirror of magistrates, the true top of formality, the scourge of enormity. Hearken unto my labors, and but observe my discoveries. But such self-serving rhetoric can hold the attention of the fair people only for a moment. Chaos is soon restored, and one unexpected event stops Overdo in his tracks. The stage direction is laconic but telling. Mistress Overdo is sick, and her husband is silenced. What has Dame Alice Overdo been up to while her husband makes his many discoveries? She and Win Littlewit have both been introduced to the pimp of the fair, Captain Wit, who has provided them with the masks and green gowns worn by Jacobean prostitutes. Overdo has not noticed his wife in the crowd scene that ends the play, not until she cries out, "Oh, lend me a basin. I am sick, I am sick. Where's Mr. Overdo? Bridget, call hither my Adam." For once, Overdo is reduced to monosyllabic bewilderment. "How?" he says. It is left to Quarles, the satiric voice within the play, and its other Johnson look-alike, to liberate Overdo. "Nay, sir, stand not you fixed there like a stake in Finsbury to be shot at, or the whipping post in the fair, but get your wife out of the air. It will make her worse else. And remember, you are but Adam, flesh and blood. You have your frailty. Forget your other name of Overdo and invite us all to supper." Overdo recovers his voice, his composure, his wife, and enough of his dignity to comply. "I invite you home, to me, with me, to my house, to supper. I will have none fear to go along." Let's take a step backwards now and ask ourselves whether there's anything to be learned from considering these two plays in relation to one another. First, we might take them both of them as evidence to support the view that within surveillance, extreme strategies are likely to backfire. The extreme vigilance of Adam Overdo is just as laughable and just as likely to backfire as the extreme permissiveness of Dogberry. This last mentioned strategy doesn't backfire, in fact, but we might all agree that it could or should. Airport security, in my view, becomes laughable when a full tube of toothpaste is treated as if it might be a lethal weapon. But this doesn't mean we're on safer ground when nothing we carry on board is challenged. Okay, obviously these are marks of the pre-pandemic days when I still hope to travel by aircraft. What then are these two plays so different from one another telling us about early modern surveillance? Perhaps they are telling us that life is short and that we're better off living than trying to watch it. Perhaps they are telling us in radically different ways that men spend too much of their time and energy trying to control by minute observation the behavior of women. Perhaps they are telling us that we, the spectators of early modern drama and performance, are by definition implicated in all of the guilty pleasures of surveillance. There is a suggestion in each play that we would be better off trusting blind luck than relying on the authority of our own observations. In Bartholomew Fair, it's the madman Trouble-All who provokes the reconciliation at the close by insisting that he'll do nothing unless he has the warrant of Justice Overdo. And in Much Ado, Dogberry sums up the contribution of his opponents as follows. Marry, sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondly, they are slanderers. Sixthly and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things, and to conclude, they are lying knaves. When surveillance comes up with such persuasive conclusions, who would want to object? The point is that, as an audience, we don't object. We laugh. And this thought takes me all the way back to my point of departure, namely, that early modern surveillance was likely to provoke fear and was often intended to do so, to judge by both literary and historical examples. When Macbeth says that he keeps a servant feed in every house, we read this as a strategy of intimidation, even though we may fall short of predicting the full consequences for Lady Macduff and her children. When the gunpowder plot was uncovered, official surveillance led quickly to a series of executions and to increased security precautions. In response to cases like these, nobody will laugh. But then there are scenes in A Chaste Maid in Cheapside where a pair of promoters, that is informers, is assigned to monitor meat consumption during Lent. And the efforts of Olivius in the subplot of The Changeling to police the sexuality of his young wife by engaging the servant Lolio to watch her treadings. These last two instances, like the strategies of surveillance in Much Ado and Bartholomew Fair, are likely to provoke the response, "You must be joking." In cases like these, laughter can be a strategic defense against social calamity. Those who laugh are forming a social community, which makes the efforts to police them look ridiculous. On this question, Shakespeare and Johnson seem uncharacteristically in accord. Perhaps, as theater professionals constantly under the surveillance of censors, health care officials, and religious authorities, they shared the desire to protect their community by representing their antagonists not as wicked, but as laughable. Thank you.